and welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Angeline Ong. Our focus today is media and entertainment, and our guest is Naveen Sharma, Senior Director and Sector Lead for S&P Global. Out with the old and in with the new. That, in a phrase, is how one could describe the pandemic's effects on the media industry. With cinemas and theme parks closed and movies delayed, millions, if not billions of viewers spent the past year sat on their sofas watching YouTube, Netflix or other streaming platforms. This is the S&P Composite Media and Entertainment Index. It outperformed the wider market over the past 12 months, up 34%. The reason? Well, look at the constituents. The top tier is dominated by Alphabet, which gobbled up $1.4 trillion, or 40% of the total market cap of the index. Next along, Facebook, Disney, Netflix and Comcast, with more traditional cable operators way down on the list. So now, with vaccines on the horizon and the potential for consumers to get out of the house and away from their TVs and devices, what's in store for the sector? For more on this, I'm now joined by S&P Global's Naveen Sharma. Now, Naveen, this is increasingly a crowded space, especially for streaming. There's so much choice. Is it not oversaturated?
I think it's too early to tell when it comes to that question. We've seen a lot of companies, media companies, accelerate their launches of their streaming services over the last year, especially as you point out, people have been home for at least a year. And so I think what you're going to see, within the next month, you're going to have every media company essentially launch a streaming service. And we're going to start focusing on things like what's in the content, what's their pricing, what their subscriber growth look like. I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation over the next couple of years. Frankly, I don't think that the way that things are currently structured today is going to be the way that these services are going to be in 5 years. And so I think, I think we're going to eventually have some winners and losers, but I do think it's too early to start picking those winners and losers.
Now, Naveen, if we look at the credit and advertising side of this, what are we going to see in terms of consumer behavior? Where will the winners and losers be?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because when we look at media, I think we've seen a better recovery thus far, at least in the United States, for advertising-based companies. So television, radio, outdoor. Advertisers have continued to advertise through the pandemic. And so the recovery that we see, we think will continue to accelerate this year. And so we're much more positive about those spaces versus some of the other ones we'll talk about in terms of the recovery prospects in 2021.
How about traditional entertainment operators like cinemas, theme parks, cable TV? I mean, we've got the vaccines being rolled out now. Are we in for a rebound or are they on their way out?
Well, certainly not on their way out, but we do think that recovery prospects are going to be a bit slower. So, all of those sectors are driven by consumer behavior. Just because people get vaccines doesn't necessarily mean they're going to automatically change their behavior and return to a lot of those venues. And so we think that that those sectors will take longer to recover. More likely we won't start to see a return to 2019 revenue levels until 2022. And then from a credit measure standpoint, we don't think that we're going to see a recovery until at least 2023.
Thank you very much. Very interesting points there. That was Naveen Sharma, Senior Director at S&P Global. Now, before I go, here are some of the top stories we're following in the sector. Britain's media regulator revoked the broadcasting license for Chinese English language network CGTN after allegations of biased coverage of the Hong Kong protests and after concluding that it was ultimately controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. The announcement provoked an almost immediate rebuke from China, which accused the BBC of, quote, fake news over its coverage of coronavirus. The New York Times reported better than expected quarterly revenue as digital readership soared in the period dominated by the US election and its aftermath, continuing a trend of increased readership throughout the presidency of Donald Trump. Revenue rose to $509 million in the quarter. And finally, Microsoft has thrown its support behind proposed new laws in Australia that rivals Google and Facebook have said are, quote, unworkable. The law would force them to pay domestic media outlets for content. Last month, both companies even said they'd pull some of their key services from the country if the rule change went ahead. Microsoft said it would be willing to live by the new regulations. And that's your roundup of the media and entertainment sector. I'm Angeline Ong, and this is Reuters.